Honourable Premier will make a ministerial statement.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And before I begin, I want to wish a very happy St. Patrick's Day to all of my colleagues here in the Legislature and to people across British Columbia who would like to celebrate on the 17th of March, whether they be Irish or they just wish they were Irish. To all of you, have a very, very good day. It is with sadness, however, that I rise to pay tribute not to an Irishman but to a Scot, a feisty fellow named John Ian Gardner Waddell, who passed away this past weekend at his home in Kitsilano. Ian spent 5 years as the member for Vancouver-Fraserview in this House, always working for the betterments of the people of British Columbia. I'll touch on some of those accomplishments as I go through my comments today, Mr. Speaker, but the Waddells started in Glasgow 78 years ago. Ian moved with his family to Toronto, where he was always happy to tell us he skipped 2 grades and still won the debating championship in his grade 12 year when he should have been in grade 10. And anyone who tried to engage with Mr. Waddell in a battle of wits found themselves immediately disarmed by his diminutive size, but also overwhelmed by his command of the language and his tenacious desire to always be at the last one speaking at the end of any engagement. Now, being a friend of mine, that was always a challenge because I too like to be the last one speaking. But Ian was an extraordinary fellow. His first foray into politics was as a 19-year-old history student in Toronto driving Lester Pearson around to campaign events. And it wasn't until he moved to British Columbia that he joined the BC NDP after succeeding Mike Harcourt as legal director of the Vancouver Community Legal Aid Society, Assistance Society in the downtown east side. Voters sent him here, as I said, in the 1990s, but he served before that 5 terms in Ottawa, 4 as the member for Vancouver Kingsway. He was tenacious and fiercely proud of being a representative from Kingsway. And in his last term, after Kingsway was absorbed in a redistribution, moved out to the suburbs, to Port Moody, Coquitlam. And I know the member for Port Coquitlam, who ended up being a constituency assistant for the Little Battler for a period of time, was one of many, many people that Ian mentored over his time in politics. He was always there for a story. He was always there for some advice. Sharon Olson, Naomi Harrison, Paisley Woodward worked with him in Ottawa. The member now we know as the Minister of Health, the member for Vancouver Kingsway. Jack Woodward, prominent BC lawyer, Indigenous rights activist, also learned under Ian Waddell. But it was what Ian did with not 1 minute in government in Ottawa that was truly extraordinary. He served prior to arriving in Ottawa as special counsel to the Berger Commission, the inquiry into the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline. And working with now Justice Tom Berger, Ian learned to understand the importance of our environment, the importance of Indigenous rights and title. And when he went to Ottawa as a member of Parliament, worked hard during the repatriation of the Constitution to ensure that Section 35 in the Canadian Constitution understood the importance and recognition of rights and title in British Columbia. That one act, that tenacious act to convince the first Trudeau Prime Minister of the importance of Indigenous rights is perhaps the strongest legacy of Ian's time in Ottawa. But he did some other things too that I think are worthy of notes. For example, I've mentioned his diminutive size. His first intervention in the House of Commons was when he was recognized by the Speaker. He said, quote, "Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for recognizing me without binoculars," because he was so far away as a member of the third party and wouldn't have taken up much space when he left his chair, as some members of this House will know. After Ed Broadbent stepped down as leader of the federal NDP, Ian was then the lone member from British Columbia who offered up to be leader of the National Party. So he gathered around him a bunch of young people, someone who would not be recognizable to this day. His assistant, now the member for Vancouver Kingsway and the Minister of Health, ran his campaign. His constituency assistant, the Solicitor General, was signing up people in British Columbia. And I just came along for the ride because I played basketball with the health minister and I worked for someone else doing other things. But Ian had always gathered people around him. One of the first people to say, "Welcome aboard," when I arrived in Ottawa as just out of school and not knowing what the heck I was going to do with my life was Ian Waddell. And in large measure, I owe my presence in this place today to Ian's constant support and encouragement. He wasn't successful in 1989, far from it. But boy, we had fun. And no one had more fun than his beloved mother, Isabel, who I can remember at age 94 dancing the night away at the Billy Bishop Legion in Kitsilano. And were she here today, I know, although she would be mindful and respectful of Dr. Bonnie, Dr. Bonnie, she would probably want to go dancing at the Legion, even if public health restrictions restricted her from doing that. Ian wrote some books. He wrote a biography. He wrote a novel. He published or produced films. He was part and parcel of the film tax credits that led to, as Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture, that led to the burgeoning Hollywood North that we know so well today. And even the former Premier Gordon Campbell acknowledged during the 2010 Winter Olympics the important role that Ian played in securing the bid for Vancouver out of the Canadian participants in that process. Ian was passionate about the Olympics, again, I want to acknowledge the government of Premier Campbell for also bringing Ian along for the ride. And that was the kind of guy he was. Although fiercely partisan, there aren't too many people that didn't have a kind word to say about Ian. Relentlessly optimistic, never negative. Ian was made Queen's Counsel in 2013, and he wrote famously in his book, literally, counsel to the Queen, a high honor indeed. Your Majesty, I stand ready to serve. I don't think Her Highness ever did phone Ian and ask for guidance, but it's her loss that she didn't do that. Ian was also famous for grabbing the mace, and I'm not even going to think about that, Clerk, but he grabbed the mace in Ottawa, and as a result was censured and was called to the bar, the first MP since Louis Riel to do so. Riel didn't show up, so Ian was the first to be chastised for touching the mace. And there was another story, and I'll end with this because I think it speaks to Ian's impishness. It speaks to his lack of strategic thought. He and Jim Fulton were both elected in 1979 to the minority parliament of the Joe Clark government. Now, Jim Fulton was of my stature. Ian Waddell was of the stature of the Minister of Finance. And the two of them contrived on an evening because Jim Fulton's minister was in the Senate. You'll remember the Joe Clark government was a minority government. They had no representation from Quebec. So Prime Minister Clark appointed a guy named Robert Decotre to the Senate and then immediately made him the Minister of Mines. So Fulton had no one to ask questions to. So the larger Fulton and the diminutive Waddell got together on one night, and I've heard this story so many times, and my biggest regret is I won't be able to hear it again. This may well be the last time it's told. But the two of them conspired to rush the Senate. Now, I would have thought you'd send the bigger fellow in first, but not Ian. He said, no, Jimmy, I'll go first. I'll get their attention, and then you run in and ask your questions to the minister. Sure enough, the gentleman usher of the Black Rods said, intruder, intruder, as young Waddell stormed the Red Chamber in Ottawa. He was immediately tackled by the larger security guards. Fulton went around the other side, asked his questions, and then was dragged out of the place. But Ian was very proud of that he took one for the team, making sure that his colleague could discharge his responsibilities to then the member was, of course, from Skeena on the North Coast, and Waddell and Fulton continued to be fast friends throughout their time in Parliament, and then when they returned back here to British Columbia. Many people will miss Ian. I know I certainly will. And for those who have known him over the many, many years, know that the last thing that he tweeted was the following, quote, "The view from my deck today is the blossoms starting. I can see Stanley Park in the distance and the rest of Canada over the coast mountains. Paradise." I'm going to remember Ian Waddell on his deck, looking across Vancouver, looking across Canada, and acknowledging what we all know. We're in paradise.
Member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and to the Premier for a very apt and touching reminiscence. I got the word yesterday from my friend, the government House Leader, who advised me of Ian Waddell's passing. I don't know about him, but it's occurred to me that one of the sad consequences of arriving here in the early 1990s is that we're called upon to, with increasing frequency, to consider the departure of former colleagues. He was, Ian, as we've just heard, born in Glasgow, proud of it, came here with his folks and ended up ultimately in Vancouver. He was a a man who played many roles, as we've heard. A lawyer, started as a prosecutor, defense counsel in Vancouver, and of course early in the 70s ended up as one of the team of commission counsel working with Mr. Justice Berger on the Mackenzie Pipeline inquiry. And I do think it is fair, as the Premier has mentioned, to mention that his appreciation and understanding of the unique linkage between the land and Indigenous peoples was greatly influenced by that experience. He was, as we have heard, a proudly partisan politician, and made no excuse for that. A long-time member, devoted member of the NDP, though the Premier has fairly pointed out, Ian mentioned to me a few years back that he actually got his start tootling around with Prime Minister Pearson back in the early 1960s, and he suffered the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of internal party politics, nomination battles, the sort of thing that all of us experience and never talk about. He was also a distinguished parliamentarian. 14 years in the House of Commons. He walked those halls at a unique time in our country's history, as we've heard, when Trudeau the First, Broadbent, and Clark were leading their respective parties, considering something no less than the patriation of our national constitution, and played a role that perhaps history hasn't fully recognized as a member of a third party in terms of the influence that he and his colleagues brought to bear in that exercise. And then he arrived in this place in 1996, which is where I got to know him. And it was shortly after that 1996 election that he was asked to take charge to chair an all-party committee that would travel the province of British Columbia to solicit input and reaction to what was then a draft Nisga'a Treaty, the first modern treaty in British Columbia. And it wasn't an easy task. The government was understandably proud of the achievement. The Nisga'a hopeful, and there were no shortage of critics, least of all political opponents. The committee was an interesting group, no less than Jack Weisgerber, Bill Barasoff, and the relatively new member from Matsqui, as I then was. But I think Ian understood intuitively that this was a time to let people speak and to encourage people with differing views to speak with one another. And his character, his patience, his sense of humor equipped him well for that task. And he would preside over those public hearings, mostly during the day, sometimes in the evening. And then he would preside over private hearings in unique locations like Animals Pub in Fort St. James, or a similar establishment in Nass Camp just outside of New Ianche in the Nass Valley. I actually do recall, Mr. Speaker, on one occasion, and forgive me, but I will share this. And this was an evening session, a formal public session, Hansard, all being recorded, and two members of the committee, I am obliged to say, during the break, during the dinner break, had, shall we say, over-imbibed. and arrived at the public hearings that were due to start fairly rambunctious, perhaps overly rambunctious. And Ian had a choice as the chair. He could call them out and would have been justified in so doing, but he was much wiser than that, and quietly reminded the two members involved that the sooner they quieted down and let people make their presentations uninterrupted, the sooner they could get back to those other activities that had clearly engaged their attention earlier in the evening. There were other occasions during that time, those travels and that committee, when it was necessary to board a small aircraft to fly to more remote parts of the province. And as you would expect in BC, sometimes the weather would descend. And I had a particular appreciation of this. There would Ian and I be, both of us nervous flyers, cowering at the front of the aircraft, contemplating our own mortality and the number of by-elections that would undoubtedly be caused by the next incident of turbulence. Mr. Speaker, Ian was fun. We've heard from someone who knew him better than I, but you didn't have to know Ian well to detect the twinkle in his eye and the eternal optimism that propelled him through life. Yes, he loved politics, but I think it's because he loved people. I could not have imagined last December when I spoke to him that it would be the last time that I would speak with him. He was full of life, full of energy. He has left us too soon, and he will be missed.
Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And as the relative newcomer, I don't have the stories from decades ago with Ian Waddell, but I can assure you that he made a very deep and indelible impression on me in just the few years that I had the pleasure of knowing him. And it is, I expect, all of us sharing the heavy hearts at the news of his passing. For me, Ian wasn't a partisan. Ian was a model for all of us in that he so clearly put service to people, to the province, to the country, and importantly, to this institution and to parliamentary democracy at the center of who he was. And in the years that I knew Ian, this is what really, truly motivated him. And his commitment to youth and to education and to that vibrant excitement of parliamentary democracy is why I feel I was so easily able to connect with Ian. And I can attest to the enormously positive impression that he made. It was pretty much impossible not to run into Ian in the hallway and absorb that joyous energy that he always had, and the brimming of ideas and innovations and thoughts and projects, and he was relentlessly energetic in finding ways to continue to be of service. And for that, I am very grateful to have had the few years of knowing him that I did. And I think that, as has been outlined by the Premier and the member for Abbotsford West, I only got a small sliver of this extraordinary man who has done many extraordinary things, particularly in service to Indigenous rights and title, the work he did to bring the Vancouver Olympics, his advocacy for the LGBTQ community and rights. He is a model for all of us. He is something we can all aspire to in our years after being in this place, is to be like Ian and remain committed to this institution, to democracy, and to service. He will be missed. Thank you.